Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today we're going to be looking at the entire history of Pokemon card art design, dating back from the OG 1999 base set, obviously English, up until 2025, with the release of Phantasmal Flames upcoming, but we already know the cards, so we can kind of judge those ones. Now this is going to be overall going through mainly the major card changes, things like the addition of Shining cards, Reverse Hollows, Full Arts, EXs, Shinings, Gold Stars, I think it's Shinings twice, but all those kind of changes that were implemented, as well as some pretty iconic changes, like the Reverse Hollow pattern change that came along during the EX era or other things like that, as it's insane just how many different things were added, especially starting from the 2010s with Black and White up until really Sun and Moon, where just an absurd amount of different types of cards were added. Now, little backstory, just gonna be quick, but if you want to skip right into the history and go probably about like 30 seconds to a minute, backstory to why I'm making this video is mainly because of the fact that I put out a video a little while ago where I talked about the ultra modern card hype and how I said that, you should try to avoid this by giving examples of ultra modern cards that are just insane value compared to old ones. Now, one of the big comments I got that was against that video's premise was that the card prices today of modern cards is justified because we are in the era with the best artwork of all time. Now, while part of that is arguably true with it being the best artwork at the moment, the counter argument is we've been in that era. As you will see in this video and this history, that all of aside from maybe a 2-3 year gap, we have always been in the era with the best artwork, meaning that we should always be having had these insane prices but haven't. So that isn't true, as well as the fact there's another argument to be made that artwork has actually not really improved since the X and Y era, not because the artwork has gotten worse or anything, but because the artwork kind of peaked with X and Y and it's just been kind of the same since. So there's a lot to talk about in here, but let's get right onto it with the Wizards of the Coast era. Now I know a lot of people would split this era up into 2, potentially even 3 different eras, with the original Gen 1 era, the Neo era, and the E-Reader era, or just split up basically Gen 1 and 2. Overall, I think they all kind of go together well. It was a 4-year era, so it's not an insanely long era to combine them all. And in terms of the card designs and changes, there weren't really a ton. Now this is because it was in its infancy, obviously. Now there are a couple of types of cards that aren't pictured. Obviously something like the Ancient Mew, which was a special one-off card, isn't here. Some of those like promo-esque different cards that came out in that time. Now you also have stuff like the Trainer Pokemon from Gym Heroes, Gym Challenge, Team Rocket that aren't here as well. But those really don't change too much aside from adding the little trainer icon a part of it and putting the, Blaine's Charizard or something like that. But these are the main cards that were added in this time. Of course, you base set. This is the overall design. Now, this is a Hollow Rare, so of course you have the Hollow Sparkles or Sparkle Hollow on it. But that was the base set cards, and that was the card design pretty much up until the E-Reader era, which, for those of you who wonder about the E-Reader, this was because of the fact that there was an actual E-Reader for the cards that came out around this time, and so they ended up putting these in the card designs. I don't really count it as a design change, more like a necessity. Now, the first real major innovation and change in card artwork was the Shining cards. This came out in Neo Revelation in 2001. You had the Shining Magikarp and Gyarados, and then of course the next set you had a bunch of other ones with the iconic Charizard in it, where these had really nice holo designs, especially the ones in the second set had the actual Pokemon being holographic, which looked really nice. And you had the Shining name. These were more special cards. These were really, really unique ones and really cool cards that were huge chase cards. They were the introduction of shiny Pokemon into the TCG, which, as you will come to find out in this video, there are a lot of different ways they implemented shiny Pokemon into the TCG. Now, the Legendary Collection Reverse Hollow is the iconic OG Reverse Hollow, and this is the probably still the coolest, if not the second coolest Reverse Hollow design we have ever had. These ones, if you've seen these in person, are insane. They have these like silver outburst effect on the rest of the card that isn't just the actual box or the artwork. They are insanely cool to look at. In a lot of cases, the Reverse Hollow is worth more than the base or the Hollow cards because of how iconic they are. Of course, you have so many Mega Chase cards from this era with these cards, or from this set. It's an insanely cool parallel, and we saw Reverse Hollows continue with another iconic parallel coming in the EX era. Now, the final major card they added was, of course, the Crystal Rares. These were in Aquapolis and Skyridge, which were really, really nice looking cards. They weren't massively different compared to Hollows, except for the fact that they were pretty much around the whole card. If you've seen these in person, whether it be like the True Crystals, the other one, they look gorgeous in person, and you can kind of see the difference between a normal Hollow and know what I mean, where They are similar, but they're different and clearly different in a beautiful way. These cards are great. The Lugia is, of course, one of the most iconic cards from the e-reader era, if not the most iconic, with it being the Crystal Lugia. The Crystal types, really intriguing cards in terms of actually the playing of the game, as well as the cards themselves. Really cool ones, and those are the last major change. So with that out of the way, let's head on over to the EX era. Now, the EX era started in 2003 and would last till 2007, a relatively long era, but this era did implement a couple of incredibly iconic cards, with those, of course, being the EXs and the Gold Stars. Now, the EX was the first one. This came out with EX Ruby and Sapphire, the first set of the era, as well as technically a couple promos, I think, beforehand, with like the Groudon Kyogre, but these EXs were great. Now, these designs were incredible and look gorgeous in person. They have a silver bordered holo with the same holo pattern that is in the actual holograph of the card, which makes for them to be truly standout cards if you've seen them in person. Even this Sneasel, this is just a random picture, obviously, that you can find online, you can tell how gorgeous this card would look in person. These ones, of course, were lowercase EXs. Now, a lot of people probably remember the uppercase EXs from the Black and White and X and Y era. These were the OG ones, and were really the OG secondary type of big chase card in a lot of ways, right? We've always had these. After this era, you had level X's, then you went back to EXs, you had GXs, you had V cards, now you're back to EXs again. This was the start of it. The truly iconic OG 2-prize card, EXs from Ruby and Sapphire. Then a few sets later in 2004 with EX Hidden Legends, you got the iconic reverse holographic design, which had, of course, all the types and stuff in the background. These reverse holos, again, just like Legendary Collection, some of these are worth more than the actual holographs. Now, later on, they would also add the actual set logo onto the bottom right of the card to show that it's a reverse holo as well, which were even more iconic than just these ones. All of these reverse holos are great in person. They are beautiful ones. It's a shame they didn't stick, past this era. And then Gold Stars. EX Team Rocket returns. You had the starter trio of Mudkip, Trico, and Torchic. And these were iconic cards. To this day, they are still some of the most iconic cards in the franchise's history. They were the first ones that really were super unique when it comes to the actual artwork. As you can see with the Torchic, they came out of the box art. You had not seen this before from cards in regular sets. And when these came out, and the fact they continue to do this, it really started pushing the boundaries for what a Pokemon card could be. Even though it was small, whether it be just a foot coming out, whether it be just part of a hand or a wing or something, the fact that they were doing this gave so much more life to the cards themselves, as well as the shining Pokemon themselves, as these Gold Stars are incredibly iconic and valuable for very good reason. They were incredibly tough to pull, but in terms of the actual artwork, they were a massive step in the overall evolution of card art. As you could argue that these cards, outside of really maybe the EXs or the Shining for that being the first truly different card, you can make a case that this was the most important innovation that they made ever. Having a card or having the Pokemon go past the art box was an incredible step for the TCG's artwork history. And then the last big one from the EX era is the Delta species. This is something that a lot of people have been wanting to come back for years. Delta species are really the first Terra types, except they were exclusive to the card, where you would either have it be like a dual type like this one, where it is both the steel and electric type, or you'd have ones that just have a completely different type for the card. These are really cool cards. They had nice reverse holo shines, as well as even holo shines. They were beautiful to have in person, and again, they were a really unique change to just spice up the TCG even more. Again, these were cards that were very iconic themselves, and it's something that people wanted to come back. And they kind of have with the Terra types to an extent, and even the dual types you would eventually see return with the X and Y Steam Siege set, which we'll get to later. But overall, the EX era was a massive step in innovation. Again, as I mentioned, 2 of the 3 most important card art innovations from really the pre-Gen 4 era are from this era, being the EXs and the Gold Stars. The Gold Stars having a Pokemon go past the art box, and the EXs being the first true 2-prize card were massive steps in Pokemon's future and their history when it comes to artwork. But with that out of the way, let's get on to arguably the weakest of the eras outside of Wizards of the Coast, with the Diamond and Pearl, Platinum, and Heart Gold Soul Silver era. Now, while I did just say all 3 of them, really I'm talking about Diamond and Pearl and Platinum. As I was alluding to early on in the intro, the only era you could really argue that didn't have the best artwork of all time for Pokemon was the Diamond and Pearl to Platinum era. And it's because they didn't add too many insane cards. Now, Diamond and Pearl 2007 added the level X's, which were just a different version of EXs if we're going to be completely honest. They were a newer mechanic, just like GXs or V cards. At the end of the day, they were just another version of EXs with slight differences. Now, these cards were very similar to the silver hollow foil border. They were hollow in the card, but the description also had some hollow foil in them as well. Now, Diamond and Pearl Stormfront in 2008 added a couple of cards, which were definitely really nice, but again, weren't as good as previous ones. Well, one of them was really solid. The Charmander, this started this era where they would have secret rares being essentially not just reprints, but reimaginings of the original cards. They would have the same artists in most of the cases come back and redraw the card in a more modern sense. This set obviously had the entire Charmander line. There would be other ones like Hitmonchan, the Birds, a decent amount of really solid ones, really underappreciated cards in terms of the artwork, as these were really cool to see. As even to this point now, we pretty much only get true reprints just with a different hollow foil on them. But these cards that started in Stormfront and went through the Platinum era were really cool, having just true reimaginings in a lot of ways of those old cards. Then they also brought back shiny Pokemon with this shiny set. This was SH or SL for the Shining Legends that would come out in Call of Legends, which would be their version of the Gold Stars. Now, these were definitely weaker designs, as the Pokemon was once again confined back to the box art, as you can clearly tell by this Duskull. Though the reverse hollow foil actually made these definitely stand out a bit much, as you ended up having it be reverse hollow with a really cool front. And yes, you could argue these made them feel more like normal shinies, where it's just, it could be any card and just one happened to be shiny. Overall, though, the Gold Stars are definitely better. But the Heart Gold Soul Silver era changed things. 2010 is when we went back to being in the era with the best artwork, as these added the Legend cards. Now, I talked about the other three innovative cards. When you talk about the one that really had the biggest impact, it was these. The Legend cards were the OG full arts. There would be two cards that you would have to pull to put them together to form, let's say, this Ho-Oh Legend card, where there's a bottom half and a top half. Now, most of them were two Pokemon together, whether it be like Kyogre and Groudon, Rayquaza and Deoxys. The Heart Gold Soul Silver base set had Ho-Oh and Lugia, but pretty much all the rest had two different Pokemon, Darkrai and Cresselia. They were gorgeous cards, and even to this day, these cards not only hold up, but far exceed cards that have come out years after, whether it be the Black and White era, X and Y era, Sun and Moon, Sword and Shield, Scarlet and Violet, even Mega Evolution. Some of these cards just thoroughly beat out any of these cards. Ho-Oh is a great example. You have a great Ethan's Ho-Oh card in Journey or in Destined Rivals. That card is nothing compared to the Ho-Oh Legend. These cards were beautiful when it comes to artwork, easily some of the most iconic and important cards in the franchise's history, because of the fact that they were the true OG full arts. Now, the other big innovation you had in the Heart Gold Soul Silver set was the addition of Prime cards. Now, these Prime cards were a bit different from other ones in the past. Yes, I know this is a promo, but it's Heart Gold Soul Silver when they added. Now, these Prime cards were ones that had the Pokemon basically coming at the player or the person who pulled the card, basically coming out of the card in a lot of ways, with this really unique overall texture or design around the box art, emphasizing them coming out of it, as well as having, again, another silver hollow foil border. These cards weren't anything major in terms of gameplay stuff. They were just sort of meant to be like better versions of the fully evolved forms, and they were gorgeous cards because of the fact they were designed to be coming at the player. These are cards that could definitely be remade today with some sort of extended box art, and I feel like they would be incredible in today's time, as a lot of these still hold up in terms of being some of the most intimidating and great looking cards or Pokemon cards for those specific Pokemon. But overall, that's the DP, Platinum, and Heart Gold Soul Silver era. Let's head on over to the true beginning of the more modern era with the Black and White era. Now, the Black and White era started from 2011 and would go to 2013. A very short era, but you'll come to find this ends up becoming a bit more of the norm. But what's really important about this is the first era that we really have two full parts of overall innovation, as there was a ton of innovation in this era. As you can see with just this picture itself, this is the most innovation we've ever gotten. The things added here really just exceed pretty much everything else, as this was the beginning of true traditional full art cards. Now, you started off with the OG of OG full arts, the Zekrom and Reshiram from 2011's Black and White. These cards were gorgeous cards. They tried to do them justice in the Black Bolt and White Flare sets, and I think they did a solid job, but man, sometimes nothing beats the originals. Speaking of originals, the original Supporter full art came out right after with N in Noble Victories. Then in 2012, Next Destinies, you had EX full arts. Now, they weren't really that different from overall full arts, but the fact this was the first EX full art is still a big deal, as you had EXs for a bit, or this was really the beginning of the EXs, and man, bringing them back was pretty wild, as the EXs were a bit different. You, of course, had the EX design and the big, bold gold logo, but in terms of the base EX design, I am planning to have a video come out in the future looking at certain artworks that have actually regressed over time. EXs are one of them, so save that for that one. Now, in Next Destinies, you also added another thing in being the new version of shiny cards. These are one of the best. These were definitely one of the ones that are up there for the best overall shiny designs, as these ones had the actual Pokemon themselves shiny, just like we've seen in the past, but they also added a holographic logo of, obviously, the type. So they put the type's logo right on the bottom of the card and had that be holographic as well. These were beautiful cards. If you've held these in person and seen them in person, they are gorgeous cards. Again, one of the best shiny designs, thoroughly dominates the Diamond and Pearl / Platinum era shinies. Overall, Black and White's first half of innovation was incredible. The fact they were able to add so many iconic type of cards like full art supporters, and a new shiny card. But then you had part 2. Now, part 2 of that era, you had Boundaries Crossed and Legendary Treasures, which really solidified just how this is the true beginning of the modern era. If you ask some people, and they say that their modern starts with Black and White, even though you may have gotten into the hobby within the last 5 years, the reason is because it's technically true. The modern era of Pokemon really started with Black and White. This second half really proves that, with things like Ace Specs coming out. This is the first time we saw Ace Specs was Boundaries Crossed. We also saw the first secret rare item cards, tool cards, just non-supporter trainer cards, with a design that I think still has not been peaked or beaten, where you have this great gold etched holofoil around the border, the card itself, obviously, and then you have a Pokeball logo right in the middle. These things are incredible to look at in person. Then Legendary Treasures took it up to a whole nother level with the Radiant Collection. The Radiant Collection introduced really unique holographic and reverse holofoil designs onto cards. As you can see, the Gardevoir, you have these ribbon-esque designs, these corsage-esque designs all around the card, and even the full arts are gorgeous from this set. They really are unique, and you can tell it's a Radiant Collection card at first glance. And then Legendary Treasures also added in the true gold cards. Again, the Mega Evolution ones are a bit different, but these are the ones they're trying to copy. While I think the new ones look really solid, once again, the OGs, man, if you've had these in person, you put them right to the light, they pop it away. Very, very, very few cards of any era ever have. This era really implemented a bunch of iconic and important cards in the TCG's history, and in terms of the impact in the artwork, it cannot be understated just how much of an impact they had. Now, while the next era we'll talk about really had the overall biggest lasting effect in terms of card art, this era was the one that really started this modern era, and it's why even to me, I still consider Black and White onward as modern. As hell, it's even why Expanded for so long has gone back to Black and White, because everything goes back to this set and this era of it being the real birth of the modern overall Pokemon hobby, TCG, and artwork. Now we're on to the X and Y era, and we're not just going to have 2 parts here, we're really going to have 4.5 parts, because man, this era added a lot. Now, with X and Y base set, you added the first true in-game mechanic, because there was the first real in-game mechanic being Megas. Megas were obviously introduced in X and Y, and so the very first base set, they put both Blastoise and Venusaur in it. Yes, they went for the second set for the Charizard. Where have we heard that one before with Mega cards? Now, the Mega Blastoise and Charizard, obviously these are the designs. They didn't actually have full arts for a while, fun fact. So this was really the only Mega you could get up until Flashfire, the very next set, where you ended up having the gold-bordered secret rare ones. Yes, they decided for secret rares for Megas to just have this gold border. Some of them were really hard to tell, like this Charizard is not the easiest to tell because of the overall border. But again, these cards are great. You had this, obviously the name of the attack, the Japanese you're seeing on the card is the name of the attack in Japanese, and it's vice versa if you have the Japanese version. So these are great cards to have both a Japanese and an English version of. Then Phantom Forces added the Silver Dialga. Still to this day, the only true silver card we've seen in terms of being a full Silver Edge card like the gold ones. Really, really iconic card, and one of those ones that is just insane. Yes, I know it's not the English version, sue me, but this is the best picture I could find for it. It isn't, insanely poor quality. Overall, though, this is a really, really nice one. These cards, I mean, if you were around X and Y, you know that this Silver Dialga was the chase people wanted to pull. It was such a cool and unique card, and even to this day, still is. Then Primal Clash added something I think a lot of people have forgotten about, and that's these ancient trait Pokemon, which essentially were borderline full arts. These were more like extended arts that we've seen with like Magic the Gathering in a lot of ways. where it goes across pretty much the full card aside from the very top, and it ends up coming to a different level or different color at the bottom. Well, these extended artworks are really gorgeous, and in a lot of ways, they were kind of precursors to illustration rares, I think, in a lot of weird ways, as a lot of these cards are great. The Gyarados is pretty iconic, this Torchic is great, there's a lot of solid ones, and especially because of this, the holos and reverse holos for these cards are insanely gorgeous because they go over pretty much the whole card. Definitely really solid ones, but that's just part 1 of the X and Y era. Now, part 2 is where we see a lot of the real big changes. Starting with Primal Clash, once again, we have the Mega Full Arts. Primal Clash added the first ones, with Mega Aggron being the one pictured. Again, these are the Mega Pokemon, but Full Arts. This is the first time they added them. They ended up making this the decision. They would end up kind of changing Secret Rares a bit for the better, which we'll get to in a little bit. But then Double Crisis came out. It was one of the interim sets. And for the first time we'd pretty much seen ever, they were like, yeah, let's make something truly new with this one. The Team Aqua's Kyogre and the Team Magma's Groudon are 2 of the best looking cards in the franchise's history, even to this day. These cards are great, and we're proof that alt art, illustration type of cards we're seeing now really aren't as new as people like to make them out to be, because again, these were really the precursors to it. Having different Team Aqua or Team Magma higher-ups with other Pokemon around them, these were gorgeous cards, and there's a reason these cards have been worth money for so long. Then Ancient Origins ended up adding the Primal cards and Mega Rayquaza with these gold shiny full art variants. Again, this was the first real dip into shiny Pokemon the X and Y era truly had. These are pretty iconic. These are pretty desirable, but not super iconic, but still really nice cards. Again, the gold border they brought back but added the full art made these basically the combination of the full arts as well as the gold bordered ones, and obviously made them shiny. Then Breakthrough added horizontal cards, and not just 2 that go together, but just 1 that goes on top of it. So we had the break cards. These ones are very divisive. I think most people aren't the biggest fans of them in hindsight. In terms of playing the game, I actually thought they were pretty fun. But they basically were just the Pokemon, just fully golded. Again, these are just, in the card game. With, obviously, the border coming down on your bottom right and bottom left of the cards. That would match the type and then have the yellow. And they had this really unique holofoil pattern that we really haven't seen in any other Pokemon card, where essentially you would put these on top of your base one. So for instance, you would have a regular Zoroark and you'd put this on top of it, meaning you just added an attacker ability. And so it was pretty nice overall. If I'm not mistaken, Delphox's was an ability that lets you search your deck for a fire energy. If I remember that fully correct, it's because that's the one I used when I played the game back then. I like these ones. I know they're not everybody's cup of tea, but bringing back horizontal cards were pretty wild. Breaks were pretty nice, but we still have a lot more for the X and Y era. Now, part 3 of the X and Y era is where we see a lot of the really big changes, we would say. And that is, of course, with the X and Y Breakthrough bringing in the first true version of an alt art, being the 2 Mewtwo EXs. Now, there would be a red one and a blue one because this set obviously had Mega Mewtwo X, Mega Mewtwo Y. And so these ones would have different Pokemon in the background and this overall design. From this point onward in the X and Y era, the secret rares were like this. Gyarados, super iconic, then the Alakazam and Gardevoir, even the Volcanion. These were really the OG alt arts in a lot of ways, as they would take, obviously, a card from the set and would have this truly special artwork. These were great cards and really were that OG alt art, as why I say that there is an argument to be made that the art quality has not improved since X and Y because it kind of peaked with X and Y. And when we get to the promos, that's even more. But then Generations, man, this rating collection also hit really well. The full arts in this set were really, really good. As a big difference from the ones in Legendary Treasures to this one is that this one implemented a lot of multi-Pokemon into them. Obviously, this is a great example with the Flareon having both the Jolteon and Vaporeon. Again, the OG 3 from Kanto. Then, the Gardevoir had, a shiny one with it. These were a really good one. The Sylveon had, an Eevee, I'm pretty sure. These were great cards. I still have a couple of these from back in the day. Then Steam Siege ended up adding shiny Pokemon in a weird way, where it kind of took away from the, rarity and, I pulled a shiny Pokemon that we had up until this point, as these are pretty common. But what they were dual types that were shiny. These were definitely a decision. I like the idea of bringing back dual types, making them all shiny and very easy to pull compared to old ones. But overall, in terms of design, these ones definitely did the dual type card design, I think, better than other ones. As instead of just trying to overlap them, they just straight up put half and half, which especially for the reverse holofoil pattern of this era, having the type being, type icon being put back to back to back of each other, makes these look really unique in person. As you can see, having the logos being just cut right down the line is great. Now, you also had XY Evolutions to start some of these, true meme cards, as Evolutions had a couple of pretty funny ones that were meant to be jokes because it was Evolutions, with, this Exeggutor being a good example of that. Flying Pikachu, Surfing Pikachu, and other ones. The Doduo was another one. Some just more funny meme cards that would end up becoming a bit more iconic later on in other eras. Now, part 4 is the promos. Now, these promos, I'm not going the full year, comparison, but these are the overall years they came out with. 2015, you had the Zekrom. This came out with a couple of collection boxes that had a lot of these ones. Again, as I mentioned before, that people act like illustration rares and alt arts were, these brand new things. They've been around since the X and Y era. This is another great example of it. This card is gorgeous. Very, very, very few Zekroms are better than this one. As you have a ton of Pokemon like this. You had like Magearna collection box. I think there's a Hoopa one. A lot of these ones had a ton of these full arts that weren't just traditional full arts. They were, in all honesty, like OG alt arts, having multiple Pokemon in the background. This one obviously having Palkia and Latios in them. So many great ones. The Pikachu Full Art EX, again, proved that this wasn't just for base Full Arts. This was also for EXs. As you had Jolteon and Electabuzz in the background, these Generations promos were great. Then, of course, you have the Shiny promos, the, more basic but still iconic, important ones, like the Shiny Magikarp. This is a pretty iconic promo from the X and Y era. Then, obviously, some of the true big, heavy-hitting Pokemon or Pikachu ones with something like the Poncho Chews. Yes, for the promos, I am leaning to the Japanese side a bit. I'm trying to stick this with just English, but the Japanese exclusive ones, I feel like they have to be mentioned. This is an iconic one. The Ponchos, the, Luigi and Mario ones, the Mega Charizards, the Rayquazas, these were massive cards even back then. People desired these ones, and even to this day are still desirable. And I mean, especially compared to some of the cards that are desirable nowadays, these ones are like legitimately justifiable because these have been desired for, we're getting close to a full decade, really. And then obviously you have the fact that these cards are just much rarer than a lot of more modern cards. These were great cards. The boxes they came in were great. Definitely one of those where if you were around, you watched a bunch of YouTubers open these ones. I'm pretty sure I remember watching like Unlisted Leaf open these boxes. These were great ones. These promos were great. And what we're going to go to the Sun and Moon era now, we are going to come back to the X and Y era a little bit when we talk more about alt arts. But it's time to move on to Sun and Moon for a bit. Now, the Sun and Moon era early on is one of those where if you were around for it, it wasn't the most popular of eras. It's a big part of why a lot of the later on sets didn't get super printed because it just wasn't the most popular. But at the beginning, the rainbow rares were so desired. If you were around, you know that at the very beginning, people loved these rainbow cards. Now, they added GXs. These are the new mechanic. The real difference from EXs in the X and Y and Black and White era, which were, basic Pokemon all the time, is that the GXs had a special attack ability or something that could only be used once. Essentially like a V-Star attack we would end up seeing, or a V-Star ability or attack we'd see later on in the Sword and Shield era. That was these ones. Now, the Rainbow Rares, of course, took the full art design but made this Rainbow Rare foil around them. Really, really cool. And it's a shame that people started hating on them in the Sword and Shield era, but part of that is because the Sun and Moon era ones just kind of looked a bit better. But overall, really iconic and desirable cards when they came out in the Sun and Moon base set. And speaking of that, again, we have two other cards to talk about in the Sun and Moon base set because the base set itself added 4 things. Secret Rare Energies. This is the first time we really saw them. And this set had a few of them. Of course, these were gold bordered with, holofoil and the card itself. Really cool to finally see this one. And it's kind of shocking in hindsight, looking back, that it took them this long to do this. You really would have thought this would have happened earlier, but no, it wasn't until Sun and Moon. Then you also had a new version of Secret Rare Trainers. I personally am not as big a fan of these ones as the other ones, even though the other ones had less, it felt like a less is more approach. As these ones kind of just put the item in the middle of the card and then call it a day with this gold background. But these were still changes that we have seen to this day. Obviously, there's some change with how the texture and the borders look, but all in all, they're the same design we've seen up until this point in the Scarlet Violet and Mega Evolution era. So those are the trainer cards. Those are the things that the Sun and Moon era added. These are all the different art and overall innovation that this set itself added. As again, this base set added a ton, but we got more sets, obviously. Now, part 2, we're going to be looking at Sun and Moon, Shining Legends, Crimson Invasion, and Ultra Prism. Now, Shining Legends brought back Shining cards. These weren't as rare as they used to be, but they were still really desirable and really cool cards. That, again, the holofoil just looked really nice in these modern cards. I actually do think that in terms of what era was the best to bring Shining Pokemon back, I would say Sun and Moon was the best. I think that the overall card design, the way holographic stuff was done, this was definitely the best way to do justice to the OG Shining designs. Now, you also added some more true sort of alt-art type cards with like the Mewtwo GX, the Mewtube. Very iconic card from this set. Another one that was really desirable. If you were around, you know how much people wanted this card. Really, really cool card and all that. Then Crimson Invasion, I know not a lot of people probably think about it, but Crimson Invasion added Ultra Beast GXs. There was a bit of a difference. Instead of having the blue GX attacker ability and the blue around them, they would instead use red, and they would make it an emphasis to say, hey, these are Ultra Beasts by having the Ultra Beast logo. So they were a bit different from the other ones, and of course the base ones pretty much all came out of an Ultra Wormhole to kind of connect them all together. Really neat touch. Then you had the Prism cards. These were honestly pretty unique. These were, and a lot, if you think about it in a more modern sense, these were like the Radiant cards we'd see in the Sword and Shield era, where you would have one of them in your deck, and then if you lost it, the difference here is if you lost it, you put it like right in the lost zone. These are unique. The holofoil, again, Sun and Moon holofoil is really unique. It would go across the actual prism that's on the middle of the card. It would be part of the star rule or the prism star rule. It'd be in the holograph. It'd be around it. These are really nice cards. Again, not the rarest of cards, but really unique in terms of design. And again, bringing back this you can only have one of them mechanic is something we hadn't seen in a very long time. And the fact that we've pretty much seen it in many and a couple of eras since shows this definitely is something that I think a lot of people do like. Not everybody's a fan of it, like with Radiant cards, a couple of them are, a bit annoying. Overall, though, really cool to see. That was what was added in Ultra Prism, but there's still more innovations and evolutions of artwork in this era. Now, part 3 would be Team Up, Hidden Fates, and Cosmic Eclipse, with Team Up bringing the official birth of alt arts. In a pure technical sense, this is the first one that people consider an alt art, because in the set it's put like right next to like the full art, like it's supposed to. Like I said, you could really argue, and we're going to talk about it in a second, the first alt art was like a few years earlier than this. But in terms of direct in a set, this was the first, where you had like the Latios and Latios, the Lovebirds one, iconic. You have other ones in the set. I believe this one also has like the Whaler Magikarp, but a few other ones. Hidden Fates brought these shiny full arts in true full art fashion, like the Leafeon GX, where they would also go part way through the border again, so being that sort of like dual threat way where they're doing it, which yes, I know that was the full arts and GXs of this era itself, but it was a bit different, and they also had some shiny vault cards, which were okay. Then Cosmic Eclipse ended up adding these great looking dual trainer ones, where they ended up having tag team trainer cards. Really unique. It's a shame we didn't get too many of those. And they also added the first real trainer gallery cards. I don't think a lot of people know this, but in terms of trainer gallery, this was really the birth of it. This set had a lot of these ones that would be full arts of a basic Pokemon with a trainer with them. Obviously, you have like Clay and his Excadrill. These are really nice cards, and I think these are definitely some of the most, like, not even really just underappreciated, but just completely forgotten cards. As everybody loves to gush over, the trainer and Galarian galleries from the Sword and Shield era, this is where they started. These are the original OG trainer gallery cards. Cosmic Eclipse, man, really solid set. Definitely one of the sets that, in terms of being worth a ton of money, really should be worth a ton of money. But we still have the promos to talk about from this era. Now, part 4 of the Sun and Moon era is, again, the promo era. And this one is another one that we're going to use some Japanese dipping into. Now, you had some legit tie-ins to the anime with this one. The Ash's Pikachu is a pretty, forgotten one now, but this is a pretty iconic card when these came out. Then, of course, you had the continuation of Poncho cards with the Poncho Eevees in this one. You also had some other Poncho Pikachus, but the Eevees were pretty cute and funny ones. Definitely one that I do want to get at some point is the Poncho Leafeon, but this is another one's added. And then, of course, you had the first of these truly iconic, painting ones with the Scream cards. I can make a whole video talking about how the Van Gogh Pikachu is unfathomably overvalued, and it's mainly because these Scream Munch promos are significantly less value for some of them, despite these being way rare, and the fact that there's only like one Scream painting versus like 2 Van Gogh self-portraits, but that's tough for another day. These are gorgeous cards. This is the real birth of these artwork-esque cards, and the fact that pretty much the ones we see now, like the Van Gogh Pikachu and any we see in the future, like the stamp cards even to an extent, this is the real beginning of them. Now, you also have these gold-etched cards that were true, like, gold-etched ones that we got in promos. These are, like, in Japanese sets, if I'm not mistaken, but pretty much all these ones would end up being relegated to promos. Pretty much all the big tag teams had these ones. Not the most desirable to a lot of people. I like them. I think they're really solid and cool designs. But part of that is because I like a lot of the gold cards, aside from the more basic ones, which we'll get to in a bit. But this was overall pretty decent era in terms of promos and what they added. Again, the Scream promos were a really big deal when these came out, and even to this day are still big deals. And then, of course, the overall gold ones. But now it's time to talk about some of the other promos you might have expected here when we talk about the OG alt arts. Now, this is the X and Y and Sun and Moon era of true promo alt arts. And yes, 2017 to 2020 is because 2017 X and Y is when we got the original ones with the Mega Lucario. There was this Mega Powers box that ended up having a couple of them, where you got a truly original alt art, where it's even more of an alt art than more modern ones. you want to be technical, in a lot of ways, these are the true alt arts. Why? Because just like in sports cards, where you usually have like a V or a different number, 55A, right? It's card 55 in the original set. So let's throw an A right next to it and get this great looking full art design. Then, of course, the N, another iconic one. This came from that iconic box, the XY collection, like the whole, premium trainer collection that had a bunch of these alt arts in it. Then you also had, like the Shaman was in that one as well. You had like the Shaman, the Yveltal, where these were really gorgeous gold bordered cards that were just like the secret rares we got later on. Essentially, they used this in a lot of ways. The trainers were just legitimately unique and cool to see, but the Pokemon were mainly in a way to kind of make up for the fact that these earlier sets didn't have them. Like the earlier sets didn't have the great secret rare gold cards, like, the ones we talked about earlier with the Gardevoir, Alakazam. That was a way to make up for those ones. And then, of course, the Lucario and a couple other ones would have full arts of them. Then in Sun and Moon, they legitimately relegated actual alt arts into promos. Like, again, like they talk about the Gold Edge cards, they put some of these as just promos. Celebi, Venusaur, Giratina, Garchomp, a few other really gorgeous ones are relegated to promos. So again, when it comes to alt arts, as much as people want to try and act as if, this Scarlet and Violet era is the best era in terms of artwork and all that, it really is just about the same as this era. There's only so many cards that rival the best of these cards, which you can say vice versa. Like, there's some cards we didn't even talk about, like the Team Plasma cards, like the Team Plasma Giratina or Lugia, which stand up to a lot of cards in the Scarlet and Violet era, as well as a few other of these great ones, like the Gengar EX Full Art from Phantom Forces. But vice versa, there's only so many cards that even stand up to, like, the Greninja from Twilight Masquerade. But overall, though, in terms of artwork, I personally think that the artwork has kind of stayed the same since X and Y. It's just a matter of the new ones having more different alt arts and illustration rares, because at the end of the day, illustration rares are alt arts at the end of the day. And I think that that's the big difference, is there's just more of them. But in overall quality, saying we're in the best era of artwork, since 2017, really, with these original alt arts and the fact you had these great gold border, secret rare cards, it really hasn't got much better. As again, like this N is legitimately one of the best looking trainer cards in the franchise's history. There is maybe one handful of cards that look better than this one. And so overall, though, those are the Sun and Moon XY era alt arts. Let's get on to the true modern era of Pokemon to most people with Sword and Shield. Now, the Sword and Shield era did actually add a decent amount of stuff. Now, it's not the most differing of stuff, but they did add a few different things. Now, let's start off with Vs and VMAXs. Again, this was just another iteration of a game mechanic, this time being VMAXs. The GXs, I forgot to mention, were kind of meant to be like Z moves, but the VMAXs were supposed to be Gigantamax or overall Dynamax versions of the game Pokemon. Vs were just their version of EXs that they made to have VMAXs. Then, of course, you ended up having the first gold card in this way. This type of gold secret rare Pokemon, I feel like a lot of people think has been around for a long time, but it really only started in Sword and Shield, where you just had the Pokemon in gold border and gold overall. But then right in the next set with Rebel Clash, you ended up starting making these shiny Pokemon. I think these are nice. I do think like the black and white and gold stars are a bit better, but these are still really solid designs. Having them be shiny in this gold border makes them really stand out in terms of being like, oh, these are special. So that was the real early stuff in the Sword and Shield era. Again, there's not a ton of massive innovation in this early era, or this, first part, I should say, when it comes to the overall designs. But like I said, the gold cards really do feel like they've been staples for much longer than, like 5.5 years. But no, they've only been around for less than 6 years, which is pretty wild. Now, the second part, we get to the official, quote-unquote, alt arts of the Sword and Shield era. But we have a few others before we get to that. Now, Vivid Voltage added these amazing rares. These are, again, really solid-looking cards. They had this really unique sort of, like, paintball. Like, if you know sports cards, very similar to, like, a Color Blast sort of design, where you'd have these speckled, hollowed, holograph around the card art that would get slightly less and less the further out you got to, like, the top and the bottom. Really cool design. Then Shining Fates ended up sort of changing shiny cards, or made the design shiny again. Not the biggest change, but just thought I would mention it. They also had, again, the really basic shiny Pokemon design. I really should have put that one on here, but I feel like everybody at this point knows what they look like, and they're kind of basic. Kind of the weakest shiny Pokemon design, where it's, the blank background border, maybe with some gold stars around them. But now Shining Fates did also add these beautiful black and gold cards. Definitely something at some point I do want to try and get all of them of. These are gorgeous cards. I think that a lot of people might not like them because I don't know why. I really don't see why you wouldn't like these ones. But essentially, they have like the gold holofoil, of a secret rare, but then it's black everywhere else. It's just black and gold. These are beautiful cards in person, and I think there's about 12 of them. So if you have one of those size binders that, fits, I believe technically it's, yeah, I think there are the 12 ones that people have, obviously. So if you get one of those, like a 4x3 binder or something like that, this would be really nice to have on a page. Then Battle Styles brought the first alt arts, and the alt arts in this set were the Urshifu's, which were, well, this one was pretty weak. Yes, I purposely used the single strike one because I think that one is like barely different than the regular one. But this is the first one that brought back alt arts into the Sword and Shield era. I know a lot of people probably don't think it was Battle Styles because Battle Styles wasn't the most iconic of them. No, there's a couple others in this set, but like I said, I just want to throw this one out there because it's funny. But this era, or this set, brought back alt arts for the first time since the end of the Sun and Moon era in an official capacity. So, thought I'd mention those ones. Of course, you have VMAX and V alt arts. Now, the third Sword and Shield era was one of those where it was more like a throwback in a lot of ways. Now, Celebrations added a couple. Now, the first one I want to talk about is this fully extended art of the Pikachu. Again, very similar to like the Diamond and Pearl Stormfront and Platinum era retro reimaginings, where they, instead of just, putting the actual box art, making a more modern card, they would instead fully redo this with a background. Gorgeous card. I wish they would do this for more of them. Then they also had these like celebration rare cards where they'd put this, speckle foil into these ones, this celebratory confetti-like holograph with the obviously the 25 anniversary logo onto a bunch of iconic cards. This Charizard is an example. There was like the Gold Star Umbreon. I think it was like Cynthia's Garchomp, the black and white Zekrom and Reshiram, and a bunch of other cards. Just a way to get a bunch of the old ones, the classic collections they were called. Then Brilliant Stars ended up adding the V-Stars. The V-Star, I think this is a great example of a V-Star overall, as the only difference from like a regular V-Star to this one and the Rainbow is obviously the parallel, as this is what they look like in terms of the overall design. Just a different version of VMAXs. In a way, they kind of made it to where you could then have a VMAX as well as a V-Star, and a V-Star is basically just a GX for all things considered. Like, all things considered, it's a GX that takes a little bit more work to get. Then you brought back official trainer, or the first official trainer gallery set with the one in Brilliant Stars as well. Again, technically this was just copied from Cosmic Eclipse, but this is the first official one. Again, another one of the Zekrom ones that's super iconic, beautiful card. Thought I would mention it, but these were, again, brought these trainers with their Pokemon. Beautiful, gorgeous cards, holographic for most of it, really solid. Then the final non-promo part of the Sword and Shield era, you had Astral Radiance, Lost Origin, and Crown Zenith. Now, Astral Radiance added the Radiant cards. Like I said, these are essentially the Prism cards of this one, as well as a different version of Shiny cards. These were other Shiny Pokemon, where they would have the Shiny Pokemon with this Radiant, where you could only have one in your deck, and a lot of these were pretty broken. I mean, these were good. This Greninja was iconic in terms of how oppressive it was. The Radiant Charizard was really good. Even the Alakazam in a couple decks, the Meowscarada deck was really nice. But these were, of course, pretty iconic. Then Lost Origin ended up adding the Lost Box cards. And unlike previous Lost Zone era cards, all the ones that really worked with the Lost Zone engine had this, this blue, pink, and purple sort of misty confetti, not confetti, but ribbon-like gaze coming around them. It went for the V cards. It went for the base cards, like, of course, the iconic Sableye and Cramorant and the annoying Comfey, which I say annoying because, I love using it in expanded format, but yeah. So that was a bit of a different design. Thought I would mention it. Crown Zenith added this really wild Pikachu card. We've gotten a decent amount of these type of Pikachu-esque cards in, the past couple of years from, like, special tournaments and all that. But this was a really cool one. Just thought I would show it in terms of the evolution of artwork because, man, it's wild. Then Crown Zenith had these, in a way, these combination of illustration rares / alt arts as well as gold secret rares. Is you would have the 4 secret rare Diamond and Pearl, basically the Creation Trio plus Arceus, with this great gold foil and etching like a secret rare, but with a true illustration rare and alt art design. Really cool cards. These 4 as a set, man, it is hard to find any set of cards that beat them. Now you have the promos. Now, yes, there are a bunch of other like alt art and full art-esque promos that I could mention, but in terms of ones that were a bit different, you had like the stamp promo. Again, this was another iteration in a way of like iconic sort of painting kind of thing. You had like the Pikachu one, and then you had this one, so those are just want to mention that. Then you actually Birth of Metal cards. Again, something I think that some people think has been around a lot longer, but no. Celebrations had the first metal cards with the Pikachu and Charizard base set reprints and the gold metal cards. Really nice cards, so those are ones. Then you had the V-Union cards, which in a way were like the Legend cards, but instead of having to put 2 of them together, you had to put 4 of them together. I don't really think any of these saw that much playing, because they were really awkward to use, and they were all promos, but hey, they were definitely cool to put together and from the collection box as a way that, make it to where you didn't just have to have the big card. And in a lot of ways, I feel like that was the point of this. It was to have a way to have the big jumbo card in a smaller card way that wasn't just the single one. You know what I mean? It's weird, but you get what I'm saying. Then, of course, you had some of these, more out there promo cards like the Special Delivery Charizard. There was like the Bidoof and Pikachu and all that. Basically, the point of this is you had a couple of these other Special Delivery cards, very much akin to stuff we get in the Scarlet and Violet era, where there's just kind of these random promos that are really unique but would end up being iconic. So that's the Sword and Shield era. Added a decent amount of stuff, but in terms of truly impactful stuff, not really as much as the previous eras before it, as a lot of it was just sort of minor changes, like some border-esque changes, just adding a random V-Star thing in them, bringing back older mechanics. But what about the Scarlet and Violet era? Does it really live up to the hype? Let's head on to it. The Scarlet and Violet era was 2023 to 2025. As for the base set, it added kind of three things. You had illustration rares, SIR Pokemon, and SIR trainers. Now, in a large way, these were just alt arts, but in a lot of ways, somewhat more detailed. Well, I say somewhat, as some of them were less detailed, some of them were more detailed. Curlia, great example of a beautiful illustration rare, one of the best we've seen in the franchise. The Miraidon EX, pretty iconic one for the base set. And then the trainer SIRs. Again, SIRs for all of them, and then illustration rares, these would become the thing for the Scarlet and Violet era, and even into the Mega Evolution era, they have stuck around. Though, as previously said, this is really the first time we've had this happen since the Gen 4 era, where you have multiple eras within one generation. As when Gen 10 comes out and that era starts, will we continue seeing Mega Evolution or IRs and SIRs? We'll see. Just like how we did see shiny Pokemon continue, like with the SH from Diamond and Pearl up through Platinum. Now, Obsidian Flames added Terra Pokemon. These were controversial, as the Terra form, or the Terra thing, is something not everybody's the biggest fan of, as it puts a really weird hat to some people on top of a Pokemon's head and turns them crystallized. I think that some of them look bad, but I think a lot of them do look really solid. Of course, the Charizard was the iconic one they started with, having the Dark type one, which did birth one of the best looking ones, which we'll talk about in a second. And that is the Paldean Fates SIR Charizard. One thing you got to give a lot of credit for with this era is the fact that when they did the shiny Pokemon, they didn't just copy and paste the original designs and just make them shiny. They made new ones. The Gardevoir was a new one, the Charizard was a new one, and the Mew was a new one. Now, the Charizard, one of the best looking SIRs of the set. This really does justice how the Terra cards can look gorgeous as you actually put the hat kind of into the design. Really gorgeous card. But before that one in 2023, you had Paradox Rift, which implemented the Paradox Pokemon, both Ancient and Future, where you would end up having the Reverse Holo be a different design, where it was much more sleek instead of it being a bit more stiff. That would go over the whole card, which really looked really weird at first glance. But those are added in that set. Now, Paldean Fates also added these really unique Hyper Rares, very similar to a degree of the ones that we would see in the Sun and Moon era with those gold cards, except these ones were, of course, blue like these. Again, I think these are nice. Are these as good as the Sun and Moon era ones, or as good as the black and gold ones? I would say no, but still really cool. And Temporal Forces would bring back Ace Specs. These were a totally different design. They would go away from that whole gray color scheme to a more like reddish, pinkish, purple color, and would make them a lot more holographic and punchy. Very much akin to like the Team Flare cards, if you remember those ones from the X and Y era. But overall, these are definitely pretty cool ones. Some of these, man, like they don't feel as rare or as big a deal as they used to. But some of these ones were super OP in the game and still are. Neo Upper Energy on Dragapult likes to say hi. But again, these Ace Specs, really cool to see them come back. This is something that when it was announced, people were legitimately hyped for it because nobody really thought they were going to bring it back. But really cool to see them back. Now, Part 3 for Scarlet and Violet is actually the last part. As much as people want to say this era was the best in overall artwork, it really didn't add that much. Even the promos really just continued what had been done before, whether it be artwork, whether it be SIR type of cards, whether it be, full arts, whether it be special collaborations like a Burger Chew. They really didn't do anything super special in terms of the promos compared to other eras in terms of new things. But to round out the end of the era, Stellar Crown brought us the official full Terra type with like the actual Terra type where it's like every type combined. This, mechanic that came from the DLC. The Galvantula, Terrapagos were the two that were the most iconic from this set. Full art is the best way to show it. They were nice because they added the rainbow border around the cards. The rainbow border was really cool. It's going to become pretty iconic considering some of the big chase cards, really the Evolutions and Prismatic all have it. Speaking of Prismatic, this is the first English we saw of the Master Ball and Pokeball reverse holos, where they'd be reverse holos that would have a Pokeball or a Master Ball plopped right on them. Master Ball significantly rarer. These were first in 151, but only the Japanese version. Wanted to mention that one. And then Journey Together ended up changing the secret rare Pokemon a bit by adding the trainer with them. Instead of it just being N-Zoroark with a regular Zoroark, they also threw N in there. These are really nice looking ones. I really do appreciate these ones. I have the N-Zoroark. I'm glad to have it. I think that they're all really solid. The Mewtwo that we saw in the next set, these are really solid cards. I do like they changed these gold cards up a bit. Like I said, I think that these gold card designs definitely compared to like the X and Y era definitely don't hit the same. These ones though, these were really nice. I do really appreciate these ones. So overall though, that's the Scarlet and Violet era. They really didn't add a ton. In terms of new artwork, it actually was a weaker era, which is kind of funny because everybody talks about it being the best era ever. Like I said, I think what it is because of the pure amount of illustration rares and technical alt arts that it makes it very easy to look at the best of the best when you compare them all. But when you compare it to like the X and Y era or the Sun and Moon era, they had far less, but they all hit. There were very few truly weak ones, whereas there's a lot of weak SIRs. Again, the Ogre Pond mask from either set are great examples of weaker ones. But overall, Scarlet and Violet era is still solid, but like I said before, at the end of the day, the artwork pretty much peaked in the X and Y era, and it's not that it's going downhill, it's just stayed the same since then. So, that whole modern artwork thing like I talked about earlier, again, little tangent before we get to the very end with Mega Evolution. Overall, using that argument of we're in the best era of artwork, that's why cards are worth as much as they are, it's just not true. As shown throughout this up until this point, every single era, minus maybe the Diamond and Pearl Platinum era, has been the era with the best artwork. And there's also the argument the X and Y era is the best the artwork has gotten, and it hasn't gotten better since, it just stayed the same. Well, let's end it with Mega Evolution. Set is still super new. Yes, I know the Mega Lucario isn't fully fit. Yes, I'm being lazy not fixing it. But the Mega Lucario is the real big change. They ended up adding Mega cards. These weren't the M Megas, these were like full Megas, that's the biggest difference. Mega designs actually look really solid for the regular EXs, and as for the gold ones, the gold cards are unique versions of the gold cards. Instead of it just being sort of like a full art version of the Pokemon with a full gold border, they ended up changing it to where it has like a legitimate design around it. I happen to really like these ones. I do think they're overvalued and they're not as rare as people say they are. Not because they're not hard to pull. These things are a nightmare to pull because there's just going to be a lot of them. These are gorgeous cards. Overvalued as hell, but gorgeous cards. And overall, that's it. Through two sets, because I am counting Phantasmal Flames, that's it. Everything else in these sets are the same. They really have not done anything to be different than the Scarlet and Violet era sets. As I think a lot of people in the future, depending on what happens in the next few sets, are going to view Mega Evolution as the exact same. It's a lot like Platinum and Diamond and Pearl. Platinum and Diamond and Pearl to a lot of people are viewed as almost the exact same. Because again, a lot of the things that you would have said came from Platinum came from Diamond and Pearl. The reimagined OG cards, the shiny Pokemon, the SH ones. Those came from Diamond and Pearl. The only real difference was like the Arceus stuff, but that's about it. Heart Gold Soul Silver was its own era, but the other two really kind of blended together. I feel like Mega Evolution has a very high chance of doing the same thing. Just because, again, the thing is the same. Like, the SIRs, they're just SIRs and illustrations again. Yes, some of them are really good, and as I will quickly allude to, surprise, surprise, a lot of people are viewing the artwork from these sets as the best ever. They're saying that Charizard is the best looking card in the history of the Pokemon game ever. Then, of course, the Mega Lucario they're saying is this gorgeous, iconic card. Which means that the same thing that people were talking about why Scarlet and Violet was worth money is happening to this, which in theory means that Scarlet and Violet is overvalued, but they won't say that. It's hilarious. But in terms of overall evolution of artwork, that's where it ends for now. We're in the Mega Evolution era. This video should come out before Phantasmal Flames actually releases, but up until this point, this is the evolution of card art. Yes, there are a couple of cards I could have mentioned and showed. Again, the Team Plasma cards from Black and White were a bit different than other ones. Certain reverse holo patterns. But in terms of a follow-up to this, I will have a follow-up at some point. I can't guarantee when. But as I alluded to earlier, I do want to make a video where I go back and look at certain artworks that have actually regressed over time. Spoiler, things like traditional full arts and EX cards are great examples of things that have actually regressed over time, as full arts really haven't been as good looking since the X and Y era, even the Sun and Moon era since, and EX cards, I think they were done the best in the original era. So that's a video to be seen in the future, but if you made it this far into this insanely long video, I know it's going to be cut down a ton from editing, but this is still probably like a 40-50 minute long video. Please subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed this one. Again, I'm trying to do more content. Now, it used to be I was doing like 3 videos a week. I'm trying to get to at least 3.5, maybe 4 videos a week. We'll see if that happens. This video took a long time to make compared to any other video on this channel, just because the amount of research, the amount of images you had to find, the amount of stuff to edit, it was a ton of work. So again, I would really appreciate a like, subscribe, and a comment saying if you how much you enjoyed this video, or if you did, what you thought about the evolution of artwork. What era do you think was the best artwork? That's a great question. Do you think X and Y is where it peaked? Do you think that EX era was the best artwork era? What about the new era? Let me know down below what your thoughts are, and also when did you join the hobby in terms of what era you joined. But as always, guys, make sure you enjoy this video, or I hope you enjoy this video. Make sure you have a great night.